Hi, my name is Angie Durhman, and I run a company called AD Greenroof LLC, an independent consulting firm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We work on green roof systems across the country, focused on design, working with building owners on their maintenance, and doing some installations. Today my discussion is going to be on the role of pollinators in our food systems. As you might be aware, pollinators across the country have been in a decline over the last several years. They're responsible for pollinating over 75% of our food crops and flowering plants. My discussion will be based on how we can design green roof systems to help the pollinators. The presentation is called Pollinators on the Parapets. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Angie Durhman, and I run AD Greenroof, a green roof consulting firm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We work with designers, contractors, building owners, and researchers on their various green roof systems across the country. We have a specialized maintenance program called GREENFORMATION that customizes for each individual rooftop based on their needs across the country. Today I'm going to be presenting on the role of pollinators and designing green roofs to maximize pollinator benefit. We'll go over some of the problems that they've been facing over the last couple years. We'll identify some of the needs that they have. I'll evaluate some plant species that work really well on the green roof systems. And then I'll go into a case study of a project that I worked on with a contractor last summer doing an installation in Omaha, Nebraska. The average honeybee mortality has been averaging around 30% each year. Researchers and other extension agents have found the causes to be from pathogen-related within the honeybee hive itself, from parasites, again within the honeybee hives, pesticides coming from agricultural production as well as nursery production, and poor nutrition. And poor nutrition could also be attributed to habitat loss. Monarch butterflies and other species populations are also at an all-time low. This is caused easily by noticing habitat loss and degradation, the loss of the larval host plant. For monarchs, specifically milkweed is essential and critical to the larval production, and pesticides. Again, when I mention pesticides as an overall chemical use, researchers have been able to find out that even more specifically, neonicotinoids have been causing pollinator decline. And neonicotinoids are very common in different types of chemicals used by farmers and growers alike. So within the rural application, you might think that the pollinators have a better chance of making it than in an urban environment where there's habitat loss. However, there's a lack of the farmers are also part of the problem with spraying for their crops. Research is not as robust as we would hope and like to see, but we are coming across some research that is showing some of the problems and finding some solutions to resolving some of the pollinator loss. Some researchers did a study on larkspur wildflowers, and they produce 1/3 of fewer seeds in the absence of the bumblebee species of just one particular species. And global declines have probably been underutilized in terms of their impact. The pollinators across the world have been suffering based on those mentions of the pollinators need protection from pesticides, flower resources throughout the season, nesting sites, clean water sources, and pollinator corridors. Obviously, we were just discussing the protection from pesticides, using not only the growers, limiting the types of plant material that you're buying at the garden center. Just when you go there, just make sure it says bee friendly or pollinator friendly. Flower resources throughout the season, meaning flowering plants across the entire growing season. So those early plants like the alliums, coming into more of the midsummer plants like the liatris, all the way through the fall, that provide different food sources for the pollinators across time. Nesting sites are important because not only are we wanting to give them food sources, we need to also protect them. So a lot of these pollinators are ground nesting, so having some sort of a protected area for them that could easily be designed on these green roof systems, as long as we can have the system support the plant growth. Clean water sources. If you think about at-grade rain gardens, a lot of the water coming from parking lots are rushed right into these rain gardens and bioswales, and that's contaminated water, but at the same time we're putting in plant material that is pollinator friendly, so there's kind of a disjointed situation there that the water is not clean, even though we're trying to bring pollinators to those areas. And then, of course, the pollinator corridors, which I'll go into in a minute. There was a study done that looked at the size of native bees and how far they can fly before they would need to be, addressing the next pollinator corridor. So obviously, the smaller the native bee, the less they can travel. This slide is in metric, but basically, if it was 820 feet, they can easily fly that distance from the small bees all the way through the very large bees that can go a distance of about 3,280 feet. So if you think about it in an urban setting, that's actually relatively doable, that you have these different pockets of plant material that will be beneficial to the pollinators that can be designed, whether it's at grade or on rooftops. Obviously, we'd like a combination of the two. Here was a study that looked at the survival of bees in San Francisco, that despite the urban setting, they were able to provide pollination services across the city. There was another study done, too, that looked at wildflower plantings, and they discovered that the more diverse flowering species mixes are more suitable for conserving the pollinators and reproducing of sown species. So the sown species meaning, like I mentioned, the larkspur. Now we're going to go into selecting green roof plants that can be significantly beneficial for pollinators. And it's important to note that not all rooftops can handle and support the weight of the soil required for growing some of these natives successfully. It's also important to know that if there is an opportunity to have permanent irrigation, that's also a nice insurance policy for keeping the plant material healthy across the entire growing season. So if you're very limited on your dead load capacity, somewhere in the 20 pound per square foot dead load range, we might be limited to still more of the succulent palette, which still has benefits for the pollinators, but not as much as if we can get up to 8 inches or even 9 inches of soil at certain areas of the rooftop. And again, going into the ecological diversity, it's important to have the texture from the grasses. It's important to have flowering perennials across the entire growing season. It's also important to have not only the grasses and the forbs, but also having some of the succulents around. So there's a nice balance across the entire rooftop area for growing the various types of plants. Succulents are also really good for quick coverage across the roof. So again, especially in the corners of the rooftops, that might be an excellent way to get some wind coverage growing quickly on the edges of the green roof systems. So the selection of green roof plants, in general, if we are harvesting for, or if we're growing for pollinators, we want to select more of the native species as opposed to the cultivated species. Cultivated species have been manipulated over time by humans to maximize color or texture or flavor. So their cultivars are not necessarily bad, but they're not ideal for native honeybees and monarchs because something within their morphology has been altered, whether it's the flower color or it's the way the flower is shaped. There's something that might possibly be not as inviting to the pollinators as we would want to see, wanting to eat the plant material, the fruit, or whatever it might happen to be. So selecting natives over cultivars is usually more important. And then sourcing plant material from the neonicotinoid-free nurseries is also very important. And like I mentioned before, you'll be able to see more and more nurseries across the country describing their growth production practices to better achieve their customer base. So here we have a number of different species that flower at various times of the year. We have the butterfly weed, we have June grass, the rattlesnake master, and liatris. And liatris is usually covered with bees every time I go up to any of these rooftops. Dahlia is another one, the purple prairie grass. Purple prairie clover. And then Asclepias tuberosa. So the milkweed species are also very important. Asclepias is an important plant in our palette because it is a host plant for the monarch larvae. Their exclusively food sources come from this particular plant, and they bloom from everywhere from May all the way through September. So they really have a good flowering time across the entire growing season. There's also a common milkweed, which is a little bit different. If you snap the leaves or the stem in half, white sap will come out. Again, this is another, some would consider to be a weed. I consider it to be beneficial. So if that does occur in your landscape and it volunteers itself, it might be a good thing just to leave it there. I mentioned the nesting habitats for the pollinators. This is where the grasses really can come in. We have the Saporbolus, the prairie dropseed, side oats grama, the Calamagrostis reed grass, and these are also great plants to have that will keep that texture even across the winter time. So when we're thinking about keeping the whether you have snow in your area of the country or it doesn't snow, having that textural height is really important for birds and other insects that might want to nest up on that area. So on my program today, we've gone over pollinators and some of the problems that we've been experiencing, the pollinator needs. We're going to evaluate the plant species, and now I'll go into a case study where we've actually been able to implement a lot of these different plant material and concepts and implemented them into a new construction project. This is a building that is situated just outside of Omaha, Nebraska. It's located in an agricultural area of the region. There was an area dug out, and then the building was constructed in the middle of, the area of Nebraska. So in this particular photo, you can see the two green roof areas that we're going to be looking at. I have the arrow down to the one. Here's an example of the roof plan. So the arrow is basically pointing at this lower right area. The building is actually separated by by just a little, maybe like a 2-foot parapet wall. And on one side, you can see this different bermed areas here, which go up to 8 to 9 inches of soil, and then this other lower roof area that's also at a slope. We also have up to 9 inches in those 3 areas, and they slope all the way down to the perimeters, which is right around 3 inches of soil. The buildup of this system was a continuous system. On top of the waterproofing / roofing system, we have a root barrier. There's a capillary protection fleece. We put in 2 inches of drainage aggregate as opposed to a dimple board or egg crate or drainage fabric. There is a protection fleece that also helps in retaining some of the moisture, and then the growing media, which is up to 9 inches of growing media. Luckily, at the time of the design, they knew the green roof was going to be going on, so they gave us about 70 pounds dead load to play with. We did utilize a blower truck in this particular instance, basically to save time and money. The site had very strict restrictions, or very big restrictions on the amount of area that we could lay material down before getting it onto the roof. So essentially, when a truck would come in, it would get unloaded and then basically be blown up right away onto the rooftop. And that was the only way we could achieve this tight construction schedule. I did design a simple irrigation system for this particular rooftop. The irrigation is designed to be utilized during the establishment phase of the roof. So there are basic overhead sprayers. Again, we're not that concerned about what's going on at grade because this is not a highly urbanized area. So overspray across the walls was not necessarily of a big concern. We do have different zones, and the biggest problem with this particular site was getting the pressure up to the roof so there would be enough water usage across the 3 or 4 different zones that we have set up to get all the plant material and all the soil wet before the next zone would be turned on. Once the irrigation was in place and the soils were bermed up to their specific height and tapered down to their minimum depths, we decided to install the plant material, which occurred in the beginning of around June in Omaha. This particular type of plug worked really well for us. We had 2+ acres to plant, and we had to move a lot of plugs across the entire roof surface. So we did have to stack the flats on top of each other, and we also wanted to make sure that the root zones were very well rooted so they could basically take off as soon as we planted them. In the top left corner here, this root ball is a little bit old, so we went ahead with each of those types of species was to rip them up just a little bit so that new roots would start forming and not be so stuck in that linear, that circular growth habit that they currently have. Here's a photo of us actually doing the plug installation. They are densely packed next to each other. We put them on 8-inch and 10-inch on-centered stagger. We mixed up the forbs along with the grasses. So we had about 15 different types of natives that we were plugging in place. Here's another photo of the plugs that were just installed. After the plugs were installed, we also wanted to seed it so that we would get some coverage short-term and long-term. So we seeded it with a wildflower mix and then the cuttings, which are succulent cuttings, blended together, and those were also hand distributed across the entire perimeter of the roof. So all that work happened in June, and when we came back in early September, a lot of the plant material had grown, and obviously we had started to see some weeds. This photo shows the transition between the succulent area and some of the berms. You can't necessarily see the textural height difference from the soils, but you can see the healthy vegetation growing in their respective areas. And GREENFORMATION is a customized maintenance program that AD Greenroof provides, which would be a great opportunity for this particular roof to utilize because there are succulents and there are blended sedums together mixed with the wildflower seeds that are germinating and also the plugs. But not only that, it's during the establishment phase, so there's going to be a higher weed pressure during this period of time. Here's another photo overlooking the entire larger roof area, you can see that it is at a slope, and that some of the perennials are already getting to be about 3 feet high. Also, you can note that not everything is in flower at this time, and that's intended to be that way, that some of the blazing star, the liatris as an example, is still in peak demand, and the bees are just loving it. We also saw a lot of monarch larvae growing and eating very, very much so the milkweed that we had planted up there. Here's a lame attempt at a video regarding the butterflies in action, and I will freely take any advice that anybody can offer to maximize or basically to capture how many butterflies were growing or living and flittering on this roof within 2 or 3 months after the plant material. I think I had a technical problem, and I will be submitting the video of this in a separate format. To further along the discussion, again, talking about plants that are desired, which were thought of to be native and blend in with the landscape, there also are going to be the under-desired plants that are going to occur as we are coming across our maintenance program. The first one on the top left is lamb's quarters, which is very common across the country. And it usually shows up in the first couple weeks of a new installation and can be easily harvested by hand without needing to do any sort of chemical spray or anything like that to maintain it. Ragweed is a mid-summer weed that can become very aggressive if not maintained early and often. These are little seedlings that have emerged, which are now the time to capture them before they become a problem. Corn, I believe, not came from the area around this particular building, but it probably did come from some of the compost that was not cleaned enough before the blending of this particular project occurred. But again, this is one of the things that, because we're up there doing our maintenance early and often, we were able to take control of these particular. So in conclusion, I hope, first of all, that the attention of pollinators has come to light, and the immediacy of helping some of the pollinators out in any of your projects, just a little bit here and there, throwing in some seeds. If anything else, just throw some milkweed seeds in and see if they're going to germinate and thrive. Pollinator decline is very serious, and it does affect our overall food systems. And if it's not now, it certainly will be in the future. We should be taking advantage of the roof design whenever possible, asking for just a little bit more structural dead load capacity, or asking for a little flexibility beyond a simple succulent pallet. Blending the two types of material together, the forbs, the grasses, and the succulents. We want to be designing the right green roof system to support the plant material that we want to have growing up there. And then maintaining the ecosystem health with green formation, basically limiting the amount of chemicals or eliminating them altogether, having a system in place to go up early and often and, provide water when needed on some of these green roofs to maximize the beneficial plant growth. And of course, to continue to educate professionals and the general public. This topic is relatively new to me, and I could not believe the amount of impact that I had on this design when I got up to the roof in September and just saw the amount of pollinators just covering this roof without even having that much coverage on the entire overall roof system itself. So when you're sitting there in our, design rooms thinking about what the different green roof systems are going to be on our buildings, we need to keep in mind that the work we do is important, and it does often affect more than the company's bottom line. So So with that, I appreciate your time today. We do have an open question and answer period on April 10th at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. And anytime you can contact me. My phone number and email are listed here on this final slide. And I appreciate it. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my presentation on pollinators. I hope you found it a little bit inspirational. I look forward to talking with you during my question and answer period on Friday, April 10th at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thank you.